Welcome back to Vox Terra. You might have heard about the raging wildfire in Colorado that burned 1,000 homes. Yet depending on what media outlet you're listening to, like most of these extreme weather events, probably they did not bother to connect it back to fossil fuel initiated climate change. And by not doing that, the public for decades now has been not taking these extreme weather events seriously enough, or understanding that is the call to scale back rapidly on the burning of fossil fuels. So one day I had on NPR, and of course they didn't mention climate change at all, but the next day I had on Democracy Now! Now, if you haven't heard of Democracy Now!, I'd call that a true left news media outlet, or something closer to it, in that the host there specializes in challenging what we'll call corporate malfeasance. So the media environment we have to deal with here in this country, the United States of America, and probably on much of the globe, is you have now these outlets that call themselves conservative, but really in a lot of ways they're just fronts for the reckless elements of the business community, ignoring climate change, thus defending the era of fossil fuel burning. Or they're like what are called the liberal news and media outlets, focusing heavily on social issues, but tending to have climate change just somewhere in the background and only occasionally connecting it back to fossil fuel burning. So Democracy Now! Had on a guest named Jennifer Block, who is the director of the Earth Lab of the U of Colorado, and what she had to say really corroborated from what I've read in other sources like the Union of Concerned Scientists, the U.S. Fourth Climate Assessment, and so on. So I'll cite from her and as well as those other sources to break this down for you. Well, story one should be behind all these extreme weather events and wildfires in particular is, as NASA showed us, world wildfires have been increasing along most of the Earth's vegetative surfaces, and that corresponds to the heating planet. And as Jennifer Block pointed out, wildfires need three main factors: heat, fuel, meaning dead, dry plants, and an ignition source. Now, NPR and many other media outlets merely focus on what was the ignition source, but not looking at what are the conditions making these wildfires more prevalent. And indeed, as Jennifer Block pointed out, wildfires have roughly doubled since 1980. And I looked, that's a pretty drastic stat, so I made sure to cross-reference it for you, and I got it also corroborated at the Union of Concerned Scientists. They've doubled, their chart goes to 1985, and showing, yes, indeed, the number of wildfires has doubled, as has the amount of land surface burned. And we'll see a similar statistic at the EPA climate change indicators. Yet all of this simple fact that wildfires are increasing with the heating planet is a simple climate change connector any news media outlet could draw, yet they choose not to. Well, how does it work? As I've explained before, the hotter Earth temperatures, this hotter atmosphere retains more moisture, can pull more out of the soil, drying things out. And with that weakening jet stream, we've seen a prolonged drought in the West. Now, this hotter atmosphere, as it can retain more moisture, also tends now to dump more moisture in heavy bursts than it used to in the past. This creates a whipsaw-like effect. So an area goes from dried out and dead to then gets a deluge of rain. Now all kinds of grasses and vegetation spring up again, and then it dries out and gets hot. Well, the most common igniter, according to NASA, is lightning, and lightning, interestingly, is also a heat-driven phenomena. So in the case of Colorado, they've had a prolonged drought, a record high June through December temperatures, a spring heavy rain, which precipitated a lot of rapid grass growth, and then, according to the guest, the dried out hot grass provided like a runway for the fire. And as well as in this case, there was very strong winds to fan that fire. Now, in addition to heat, wildfires in heavily forested areas, and in addition to grasslands catching on fire, also happen because the forests in general are being stressed by heat. They are getting sick, especially due to increased insect infestations related to winters and many places not getting as cold as they used to, and not killing those bark-eating beetles as well as ticks, which affect people and other mammals and animals. And as the Union of Concerned Scientists shows, with the earlier onset of spring, the snowpacks are melting quicker, and therefore the forests and vegetative regions are getting more dry now throughout the summer months. Now, many people like to cite non-climate related issues as the cause of these wildfires, but here I'd like to point out that those two are also correlated with a general lack of stewardship for our environment and a general lack of focus on the long-term survival of our species. So those not necessarily or not exactly climate related would be building into what are called wilderness-urban interfaces, or the urban areas pushing deeper into wilderness areas that maybe are more fire-prone or flood-prone or whatever the case is, lack of planning. We often hear poor forest management, but what that really relates to is what's called fire suppression, meaning putting out fires that maybe should have ran their course or at least had some type of controlled burn to clear out undergrowth and dead plant matter. But those controlled burns, or that natural process of wildfires being suppressed, is also related to poor environmental stewardship, because it's related to, again, those buildings that putting neighborhoods in fire-prone areas and those residents not wanting to have those natural fires rage, at least in partial. And then keep in mind, these increase in wildfires is also adding to what are called climate feedback loops, meaning as the earth heats due to initially the burning of fossil fuels, Mother Nature is now heating herself up. So as the forests burn and get sick and decay, they add more carbon to the atmosphere. And lastly, if you're listening to naysayers who say, well, it's not climate change, please remember that these wildfires are increasing not just in areas that have opportunity to be forest managed, but worldwide, including in the northern boreal forests in the Arctic region, which really aren't subject to forest management. There we are also seeing an increase in wildfire due to those heating conditions up north. Well, hey, I hope you found this video helpful. Please remember, we got to connect these extreme events back to climate change. The media really isn't doing it, or we are like that frog in the boiling pot of water. Heat until it boils, and then it's too late. So let's take action now, scale back on fossil fuels, support politicians who argue for doing that. And until next time, please make sure you're subscribed, you're liking, you're commenting, and as always, peace be with you.